everyone, and good and wonderful, whatever moment of the day you're enjoying on your time zones, either as you take the time and the curiosity to watch us live now or later on the recording. My name is Minola Jacques. I am your host today. We have Jessa backstage taking care of us as usual. It warms our hearts to see your comments coming in. It's always, first and foremost, to see where Hacking HR reaches you in this beautiful wide world, but also to get confirmation that technology is actually working. So we will be spending the next hour discussing about the skills gap and also looking into designing cultures of continuous learning. We have an amazing panel. So Jessa, please help me fill the screen with all the wonderful people we have with us today. In the meantime, again, welcome to everybody joining, and please do consider this conversation open to you just as much as to our panelists. Use the chat space to raise your questions, just build connections, and I will try to keep a lens on your comments and then bring your highlights into our conversation. Just bear with us because there's a little bit of loop before we see your comments. So if there's a bit of a time delay, we are doing our best. So a beautiful day. Wednesday is the favorite day of the week for me, and seeing you on my screen just makes it so much better, especially talking about skills gap and continuous learning and all these wonderful things. So let's make the most out of our very, very short time here today. You all know the drill. I will pass the e-mic around as you appear on my screen for the first round of intro. And the first ask is quite simple. We will just ease into the topic. So we will go clockwise. That means Dr. Teddy, you will go first. Kirditra, you will bring us home on the first round. And just to remind you, after this first question, it's unmuting competition officially open, and it's very difficult to go last. So let's see who has quick fingers. Now, the first ask, a short round of introductions, and please share with us a short story of someone or something, an event, a situation that profoundly shaped your relationship with learning. So, Dr. Terry, you will go first. It's so good to see you. It's been too long since we shared the panel.
I'm delighted to be here and to see you, Manola, and all of you. Thank you so much. I think something that was really powerful for me around learning is when I discovered that learning enables unlimited possibilities, and that I had the agency to drive those possibilities as long as I was committed to learning. And it's not learning in the context of degrees. I often tell this story. I probably have about 16 letters after my name. That is fantastic for now. That creates great access. But I am constantly focusing on what is next and how to leverage and tier those skills. And that is really a passion that I share intimately with colleagues as well as clients.
Wonderful. Mary, welcome. Good to see you.
Oh, so great to be here with you all. Thank you so much for having me. Right. So my story now, I think this is, by the way, it's a fantastic question. Manola, you know, I love reflecting, and that's one of those questions that takes you back. So I will go back to the beginnings where when I emigrated to the UK. I am native Polish. When I emigrated to the UK many moons ago, with no qualifications, no skills other than I could speak some English, which is not necessarily a unique selling point in an English-speaking country, and I couldn't even write a CV. And I got rejected from a job at Zara in a shop. I realized, well, let's see what's going to happen. And I was still a student at the time. So I got my first job in a call center. And very quickly, I learned that if I put the effort in and I'm going to work and I'm going to take on the hardest work that no one else wants to touch, and I'm going to learn through it, perhaps that's going to be my way to build a life in the UK. And here we are today. So thanks for taking me back to the beginnings of this question.
Thank you so very much for sharing. Candace, so good to see you.
So good to see you and to meet my fellow panelists. I just love the work of Hacking HR and the contribution, the many contributions that Hacking HR as a movement, as you call it, Manola, just accomplishes for the work of HR. And I just always count it a privilege to be a part of this. I'm the Director of People, Culture and Engagement for the Canadian Mental Health Association in Western Canada, in Kelowna, BC. And it's interesting, the story that comes to mind for me is early in my career, and I'm going to try to be concise, which is a bit of a challenge in a story for me. But I was part of, I had a job that helped to move some people with complex and profound disabilities out of an institution and into a home, their home for the first time. So this was part of the deinstitutionalization work that happened in the 90s. And so I had the privilege of helping some individuals move out of institution and into their home for the first time. And one of the people who was working in my community who was supporting us had started her career as a nurse in the institution. And when she came into this home that we were creating for the people who were moving out, she said, I believed I was doing the right thing when I was a nurse on the locked ward with the people that were helping to move out. And right now, we believe we're doing the right thing by pulling them out of institution and giving them their own rooms and so on. She said, 10, 20 years from now, we will change our minds again. Like at so many stages, we believe we're doing the right thing based on what we know right now. And it was really it was very humbling for me to hear her say and explain and even I took it as a stern warning that what we believe we're justified in believing right now, and we believe that that the things, the decisions we're making right now are better than any of the ones in the past. There will be a future either version of ourselves or a future person who will realize that what we're doing right now is maybe not the best long term or the best for future generations and so on. And so I've never forgotten that. And so we're doing our best today, and our best today might not be the right decisions in the future. And so we best be humble and take that learning, that continuous learning posture. So that's
What a
what comes
story.
to mind.
Thank you so much. Kirditra,
Hello.
welcome.
Thank you. I am Kerditra Osborne, and for me, my learning journey, or my push to learn, came early for me. I was actually in the 8th grade and had a teacher that told me that I would never graduate from high school. So for me, that was definitely a push to prove him wrong. And for me, learning is something that someone can't take away. It's and still skills do get old. So from a continuous standpoint, you have to keep learning. You have to keep growing. To Candace's point, what we use to solve today's problems, that may not work in a year or 2 years or 10 years. So you've got to continue to learn. You've got to continue to grow.
What amazing stories! And just a small confession: the music just before the panel inspired all of us to do a bit of chair dancing. But just listening to your stories, I could barely contain myself not to continue. So I really loved how you anchored your stories in the past, but also made them forward looking. So let's keep this energy a little bit and talk about a skill gap. What is a skill gap? How do we go about identifying it? And you will get extra points if you put just a tiny bit of a twist. What are some of the misassumptions or misperceptions that you see around you when people try to go about doing any kind of skill gap work? And let's do this. Mary, I will ask you to start us into this round of answers, and then everybody, please build your conversation.
Okay, well, I do echo what you said about the chair dancing. You know, I love to dance, so any opportunity. Okay, well, where should I start? Look, hopefully I won't sound too processy, but it is about, for me, in simple terms, it's about taking stock of the reality as it is today in terms of my own capabilities when I put an individual lens on it, and being clear in my head where I want to be in the future, whether that future is 6 months away, whether that future is 6 years ahead. It's for me as an individual to determine. And then it's for me as an individual to determine ways in which I can get from the current state to the future state. And I put specific emphasis on the me because I do believe in that self-accountability on our learning journey. If we see ourselves as individuals in our organizations, which are part of a system that works with us, for us, or against us, it depends. And also, it can be all of it in one organization. They are very complex organisms, which is how I like to think about companies. But I put emphasis on that self-accountability because the system around us, as I said, will either remove friction or will add to that friction. But the easiest thing to do is to point fingers. But what am I doing day to day to achieve what I want to achieve in the future? And whether that system fully supports that or not, well, you are very lucky if it does. If it doesn't, perhaps that will change in the future. Perhaps this is not a place for us. But I really encourage everybody listening to us today to really, really think about what it is that I, as an individual, can do every day, whether there are barriers in place or not. And perhaps this is a bit of an idealistic view of the world. I will say, though, that it has served me personally quite well.
Thank you. Dr. Terry, I see you unmuted, please.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting to me about when we talk about skill gaps, I remember conducting research back in 2013 about this impending workforce skills gap crisis of 2020. And so we are living that in full steam. And so I think I want to really kind of chime in with and build on what Mary said. We know from an organizational perspective, one of the ways to identify skills gaps is to conduct a skills assessment. And that comes with a lot of work behind the scenes of aligning skills and capabilities with current roles, along with roles and skills that will be required in the future. I think there's this very delicate dance that we need to participate in. And that is that while many employers are very committed to upskilling, it's one of the top priorities for CEOs, we individually own that. And as part of that process, in my view, we all have to become or engage in futurist type activities. And that is engaging in foresight and looking for signals and signs of change, some that are non-traditional, that will shape the industries that we work in and the work that we do. And developing that muscle as an individual and as an employee really can help you stay ahead of the future. The other piece is that we all have skill gaps. We will always have skill gaps because the rate and pace of change and the influence of technology in driving shifts and change are going to create that type of synergy. And so being personally committed to your own growth and aligning yourself with organizations that have a learning culture and that are committed to humanizing the experiences for employees both now and the future by developing them, is a great way to stay ahead of this.
Kilditra.
I'm over here smiling. I totally agree. I think from a learning standpoint, there are organizations that view it as being important. There are others, not so much. But I do believe that it also falls on the individual. So if you're looking to learn, you can't necessarily wait for someone to hand you that learning. You have to be diligent, you have to own it, you have to be able to identify what some of your shortcomings are. And if you're not sure, ask someone around you. I'm sure they can help you get that figured out. But it for me, it's shared. Yes, the organization, some organizations embrace it. There are learning culture. There are others that are not so much, but it is on the individual to get out and learn, grow, and develop.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We're in Canada. There's a lot of focus that's happening right now on truth and reconciliation with Indigenous populations within our country. And September 30th is Truth and Reconciliation Day, and so it's on our minds, and it's a big part of the conversation that we're having within our workplaces as well as within our cultural context. And so when we look at learning and development, the um, having a look at what our values are, and not just our corporate values, our organizational values, and how we can try to embed and live out and promote those. But there's also this very important, human conversation that 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 we're having here. And as part of that, and I am coming around to learning and being learning organizations, like our approach to learning and development has historically been very consistent with everything that smacks of colonialism. And so what I mean by that is that usually a white person will who's in a position of authority will say the way that we should do this, and will show up with, here's what I think we should do, rather than taking an inclusive and listening and holistic approach. And so we're trying to really, before we just move forward the way that we've always moved forward, even if we consider that, some of our values are evidence-based and best practices, and we want to, and taking the job analysis approach and so on, and skills gap, we're trying to really look at our processes and think about who has who's impacted by these decisions, who are the people on the end of, or in the middle of, or on the delivery of the decisions that we're making. And how do we how might we consider approaching this differently, so that the most important voices in the room are heard. And it's slower, and it's less efficient, and I'll say that it's messier in a lot of contexts. But we really are taking very seriously an approach of co-creation, and trying not to assume that the people who are in positional authority have or who maybe have the most letters at the end of their names. I appreciate that too, right? Like, somebody asked me on a community of practice call I was on yesterday, what are my credentials? And I'm like, who cares? Like honestly, like, who, and definitely within the work of the Canadian Mental Health Association, something I love about this organization is this value of nothing about us without us. If we're designing services for people who experience chronic and persistent mental illness, or if we're trying to promote more mental health, like, who is on the receiving end of this? And how can we include? people more holistically.
Mm. So many conversation candies here, and I will come collect as we move forward. But we touched on many elements, and I'm tempted to ask, what is a culture of continuous learning? What is the organizational dimension of a culture of continuous learning? What is the individual accountability and ownership within a culture of continuous learning? I loved this DNI, this intentional DNI lens, Candace, that you brought in. But Kirtitra, I loved how you said in the last round with, you can expect to be handed down some learning offering. So could you just lead us into this bit of our conversation? What is a culture of continuous learning?
An organization that puts budget behind it. Other than that, it's just talk. It's talk. We're an organization where, we support learning, we support your development, we support growth, but there's no finances behind it. So for me, it's not just about what you say, it's where you're spending your money. So if you're not spending money on improving the learning, educating your organization outside of compliance, right? We all have to do compliance training. But if you're not investing into the development of your employees, I don't view that as truly being an organization that is committed to continuous learning.
Here, here. Thank you for saying this. Put your money when where your mouth is.
Yes.
I would add a second component to this: the money, but also expectation and permission. What I mean by that is, I don't think one is possible without the other. We can pump a lot of money into content, into initiatives, into events. But if no one shows up because, for example, managers or leaders in the organization do not support me taking time outside of my flow of work to do that, or whether it is in the flow of work, then that money aspect, will be lost as well. I'll give you a specific example. I am currently at Rolls-Royce heading up strategic capability development in line with the new transformation strategy for the organization, which is a 5-year plan under the new CEO. And part of that challenge is exactly what I described. There is a huge drive here for us in terms of enabling the strategy through learning and development. And there is a big financial commitment. But the other side of the story is that a big piece of our work is on the culture, and senior leaders in particular and managers to be enablers for their teams to learn and grow as they want to and as they need to, which is not there yet on an organizational level. So for me, those two things need to go hand in hand if you want to see a change in an organization on a systemic level.
I totally agree. What gets measured gets done. So it needs to be, whether it's a goal, whether it's learning units or something, but there needs to be that commitment as well. So that's a great point. It's more than just the budget. You have to make sure that there is some sort of goal or some sort of measure to ensure that people are actually doing it or taking advantage of it.
And in addition to a lot of thoughtful, approving nodding, I see on the screen, I see quite a lot of energy and support in the comments. So this is wonderful. Candace.
I'm not sure what more I have to add to this one. I wanna only add.
And Dr. Terry.
Building on that, I would say that with institutional backing by way of a financial commitment and some shaping around culture, in addition to that, the training has to be relevant to the learners, and the L&D function has to align with the talent management function to be able to create internal opportunities for employees so that the learning is not only relevant, and of course that also what goes along with that is making sure that the training is within the, moves with the rhythm and flow of change, not just by way of relevancy, but also by in the context of how people want to learn. But creating an environment where employees actually can live and breathe and see that there is an internal benefit to the learning and not learning for learning's sake, and that there is some form of career pathing for them along the way. I think that simply, really kind of drives a lot of energy and excitement and curiosity, which is needed to really kind of help to propel employees towards learning, to bring that full circle.
Mm. Candace, if I may, I will give you an extra bit of a challenge
Okay.
when you bring in your comments, because I really loved um, what that wonderful nurse said to you on
Mhm.
how every decade we will change our minds.
Mhm.
And I was looking for a hook in our conversation today to bring in unlearning and relearning.
Mhm.
So invite you, if you accept the challenge, to walk us a little bit into what is the unlearning and relearning part of a culture of continuous learning.
Yeah. Oof, okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I often talk about like a mixed up Rubik's cube when we are looking at important problems, right? Like we need to spin it around and look at all the sides before we can get to solving it, right? And in your question, Manola, like there are many layers, and what occurs to me, just first as you were laying out this beautiful complex question, is the importance of safety, psychological safety within the organization. And we've been, I think, talking about it a lot, and I'll still say we aren't talking enough about it. So, the critical importance of creating formal and informal mechanisms for us to promote two-way feedback, especially when the stakes are low. So, when it's not a big deal for us to create and invite those opportunities for us to say, I don't agree with you, or I have a different opinion, or to question either people in authority, or to question the way things have always been done around here, to question those things that we assume are best practice. We have to promote those opportunities and make it safe for people to go, oh, well, let's talk about that, like, and to create those environment, because if it isn't safe for people to challenge the status quo, then we're not going to learn. People aren't going to challenge the way that, and we're not going to have that opportunity to learn or to unlearn. It's maybe a theme for me, and I'm stuck a bit on it right now. Like, just and I'm stuck because I think I'm feeling the pain right now of how doing this well is messy and time consuming. And so from to create the safety and the opportunities for people to say, I think there might be a better way, but then to take the time to do inclusion properly, to take the time to, like in design thinking, that fall in love with the problem. Falling in love takes time. We don't fall in love in a 15-minute or in a 2-question survey. We don't fall in love with, when we when we get a bit of negative feedback on, after a training session that we do. We don't, like, we need to fall in love with that problem and say, like, and when we do that, then there's care, there's attention, there's time, there's learning, and there's unlearning. Like, okay, you don't like this, but I care enough to ask you what would be better, and to really try and understand, what might be better and why. Why is better better? And in the chat as we were preparing, to choose present over perfect, and I think that that might be applicable in this particular conversation.
The one thing I'd have to add is a title doesn't make you the smartest person in the room.
Oh my gosh,
right?
no.
I often come to my team and I'm like, here's the solution I've got. It's the best one that I have. It doesn't mean it's the best solution. So you have to be vulnerable. You have to be open. And you have to be willing to hear someone else's ideas and be willing to try them as well.
I am so inspired listening to this. I remember many, many moons ago in a previous organization, I had so much fear of making a mistake because I was surrounded by people who did not accept a mistake, even if it was the smallest one. And I recently had the opportunity to visit Stockholm for the first time. And I went to the Nobel Prize Museum and it inspired me. And what you just talked about inspired me. Imagine if all these people in science and chemistry and literature did not fall in love with all the problems that they did actually fall in love with, and they let go, or they looked for a quick solution, or they never asked questions. Is there a better way or a different way, Candace, to your earlier point? Imagine where we would be today as humanity if those people let go and did not fall in love with these problems.
Listening to you, I got reminded last week I was part of an amazing LinkedIn Live on the power of questions when leading change. And there's this mirage pitfall of finding comfort and control in answers. And we oftentimes take questions for noise and unrest. And questions are the best markers of psychological safety when people feel comfortable and safe to ask questions. So thank you so very much. We are in the second minute of our second half of this conversation. So what I will do, I will take a few seconds just to welcome those who popped on the link a little bit later. And don't worry, whatever part of this conversation you missed, you can find it on hackinghrlab.io. So please go there and you can find the recording of this one and also the recording of our previous series. So I think I've been pacing myself to ask this for long enough. And Dr. Terry, I know this is near and dear to your heart. Generative AI and all these future-looking technologies and opportunities. So I would really invite you to pioneer us into a part of this conversation about how does generative AI come into conversation about bridging the skills gap?
That's such a great question. And I will add this plug. I created 2 courses for LinkedIn Learning this summer. One on how generative AI is shaping HR in general, and the other is how it's shaping L&D specifically, or the opportunities and possibilities of shaping and driving change and impact in L&D. So what I will say is this, particularly as we're talking about, this momentum around learning, generative AI in the context of how folks like us use it really only opened up and became available a handful of months ago, barely a year ago in November. And by the time we got to the first quarter, there were tons and tons of insight reports that really drew attention to the powerful impact that it can have around shaping processes and driving productivity. So I think landing here, particularly in the context of learning, is really important. So if we look at it in the context of helping L&D leaders really kind of mitigate challenges, some challenges around creating learning that's in alignment with business goals and initiatives, being able to demonstrate impact, or doing some of the heavy lifting as we, take a look at more and more organizations moving or having the desire. The work is hard on the back end, but having the desire to move more towards a skill-based culture or introducing talent marketplaces, generative AI can help in that regard. And so not only can it help in assessing skills, it can help in driving agility and responsiveness as it relates to training. So if we just think about learning and development programs, if we just think about leadership development programs, most leadership development programs are out of step with where we are today in the context of how work and the shift and change of the acceleration of the future of work has moved us. And so from an instructional design perspective, being able to leverage those tools is incredible for driving efficiency for L&D leaders. The other piece to that is that depending on where you are in your digital transformation, the organization is in its digital transformation journey, where you are with data, it's a great way also to introduce learning into the flow of work. As more and more of these capabilities and extensions and tools continue to grow. I think to date, there are 7,000 plus generative AI tools that have launched since the top of the year. So I think sparking curiosity with L&D leaders about leveraging the technology. I think, getting in front of the fact that generative AI has positive impacts across can have positive impact across the organization, but it also strikes fear in the heart of a lot of folks around job displacement. And so I think looking at that realistically and humanizing that becomes critically important as well. But it is definitely a tool. It comes with challenges. It's not perfect. It's in its infancy stage. There are a lot of issues around privacy, intellectual property, hallucinations, bias, and all of that kind of melted into, that. So I've always encouraged a level of caution with the exuberance to leverage the technology to drive productivity, whether it's in L&D or in other areas of the business.
That resonates with me a lot, Dr. Terry, what you said. And one piece that's very high on my mind when I think about augmenting us with this kind of technology is also, what does accountability look like in organizations day to day in the future when we have a co-pilot that supports us? It's just such a fascinating topic for me, particularly when I think of, for example, the impact it will have inevitably on, for example, the role of a HR business partner.
Oh, yeah.
So I've worked in this and previous roles. HR business partners are always one of my key stakeholder groups. And it's an interesting one because on the one hand, they, like many other people, many other roles, it's not just applicable to that particular role, but there is a lot of fear. But at the same, is the tool going to replace me, which is a very big sweeping statement. On the other hand, HRBPs forevermore, since I can remember, have been so overwhelmed, particularly with tedious manual tasks a lot of the time, that sometimes I think in this day and age where AI and generative AI tools is the hot topic that we hear about from all different angles, they sometimes maybe forget that it's not black and white. There will be an element of replacing certain tasks, but those tasks that they don't want to do, or they're very low value potentially as well. But a big piece, again, to your point, Dr. Terry, about sparking curiosity about those tools, is we need to be really clear about how we also need to learn to work in a reality where our work is augmented with these tools. How do we need to upskill ourselves to use these tools as best as we possibly can? There are a lot of experiments. I'm involved in some experiments at the moment myself. And it's very clear that obviously these tools are not perfect. And it makes a huge difference what query you put in. For an example, the quality of your query will mean potentially the quality of the response that you're going to get. But it is still a hit and miss, as you said, Dr. Terry, because they are in their infancy at the moment.
Just to build on that, those were such great points, Mary. What comes to mind is the point that you made about using generative AI tools as a co-pilot. And I'd add to that to look at it as a force multiplier. There's a very interesting statistics. IBM announced a few months back that they were going to no longer hire for about 8,000 roles that would be replaced by, they were targeting to be replaced by generative AI. Three categories of focus: human resources, finance, and accounting. And they identified about 30% of those roles across those categories could be replaced by those tools. And so I don't remember who made this quote, where this quote comes from, but I love it and I use it a lot. And that is, you should focus less of your intention around the fear of being replaced by AI, as opposed to the human with skills that to use and leverage the tool replacing you. And so let's, kind of build on that as well. The skills, you made a point about the prompting and leveraging that. 60% of organizations today, 60% are using generative AI in at least one function now. And so when we think about the value of generative AI in the context of how it can leverage and grow productivity and performance, it's across it, the level of productivity increase varies across functions and roles. But the real value is in extracting the value from the tool to drive business in ways that either had a longer time horizon or were too complex in the past. And so that requires learning across the organization. I love PwC's example. The Chief Human Resource Officer at PwC announced a couple of months ago that they were providing generative AI training for all employees because it was a skill that all employees need. And so from an HR perspective, jumping in with both feet in the context of learning how to leverage the tools, not just at an infancy, not just at an elementary level, but really learning how to use that and leverage it against some of the most complex challenges and problems to move the organization forward is a really good focus.
Yes. And I would also argue, just maybe very quickly, that to add to what you're saying, Dr. Terry, is for me the role of the human is even more prominent, because particularly today, I don't know what these tools will look like in the future. I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't. But even if we look at the status quo of them today and what role we play, we become the auditor, because they are not at that level yet that we can fully trust that everything that it throws out at us is fully correct. I have a very simple example that I tested actually last year when ChatGPT just came out for the first time. And it's a very long story, but essentially we were looking with my team for different border crossings around Ukraine, and we knew from our experience which ones were the largest ones. And when we asked ChatGPT to give us all the border crossings with Ukraine and neighboring countries, it actually said, well, I can only give you 3. And it gave us 3. And in those 3, the biggest one actually wasn't included. So that's a real case scenario where we, as humans, we knew that it went wrong. And we were the ones that relay that information to the business. And we were the auditors of that tool. And we brought about the most value in that context.
That is such a great example. And it speaks to the fact that HR domain knowledge will still prevail. You have to have the knowledge to be able to not just identify deficiencies and errors, but really to use it, whether you're working in, whether it's you're applying it in L&D or in talent acquisition or in organizational effectiveness, the domain knowledge is what will give you domain knowledge plus curiosity plus problem solving skills. Mix that with systems thinking and design thinking, will really enable you to, really use it as a catalyst for really solving problems and driving efficiency.
I will advocate with Enrique to have a full series dedicated to
Generative AI.
Thank you. That one. I'm running out of English. But Kerditra, I saw you unmuting yourself there for a second. Please.
I just wanted to make one point. Earlier, it was said how there's the fear of whether it's Chat GPT or what have you. It's that fear of the unknown. So when you teach people what it is, when you educate them what it is, it kind of helps to reduce that fear or get them a bit more comfortable. So I just wanted to point that out.
I really love that. Knowledge is a great way. I kind of alluded to that in my intro. Knowledge and learning is a great way to mitigate fear and unlock possibilities. And I think it's really interesting too. There is still a very small percentage of the population that has even heard of generative AI. And then there's a recent SHRM survey that indicated that only about 35% of employees believe that artificial intelligence in general would impact their job over the course of the next 3 to 5 years. And we know that that's relatively displaced. And so I think being very intentional and having authentic conversations about your organization's strategy with generative AI really can support a culture of trust. Employees are hearing all sorts of statistics. What did we hear a few months back? Goldman Sachs projected that 300 million jobs globally could be eliminated over the course of the next 3 to 5 years because of generative AI. There's more of a national conversation, and the impact of artificial intelligence on jobs has really hit the zeitgeist. And so I think there's an opportunity in a couple of regards. So number one, if you truly are an organization committed to learning, start some conversations about learning and engagement with these tools, because the conversations and the curiosity is there. The other raises the question too, if generative AI indeed will have impact on jobs, in the context of displacement and elimination, what role does L&D play then from a societal perspective, and from a human perspective, and in preserving the employer brand and culture, in engaging in outskilling? So I use the example of IBM. IBM announced that they're eliminating 8,000 positions that they can replace. They're no longer hiring for, or they're going to replace those roles with generative AI. So the question is, there's an opportunity then to prepare those employees for other roles inside of the organization by engaging in a high level of skilling up that's relevant for them. And then for those that will be displaced and there's not a place inside of the organization, what type of training and learning and upskilling to ensure that they have a softer landing on the other side, outside of the other side of the door of the organization. I think that helps to cement a culture of trust around the implementation and engagement with these tools in a way that is different and requires a little bit of unlearning about how we look at moving folks around in an organization and outside of an organization when we no longer need the skills or competencies that they previously had. And that's really kind of an ouch in communicating it in that way.
I would really love to take one aspect of this conversation a little bit deeper. So we live in a reality with fluid job safety, where people make decisions that translate into sabbaticals or breaks in their resume. some other people make decisions to go for a fractional career setup. So I would really ask each of you if we can give some very practical, very actionable inspiration to our people in the audience. If they themselves are in a situation where they want to take ownership of their own skills development when looking at different career realities, or they are in an HR role and they need to give guidance and support to people around them, or even we have someone, a friend or a family member that is looking for questions on how to make their skills continuously and sustainably relevant, what would be the advice that you would give? And maybe we do this, we start diagonally. So Candace, I would invite you to lead us in this one.
Sure. So what comes to mind for, I mean, we in HR have these kinds of conversations, so often, and I think, there's the very, traditional approaches, anyways, that I've taken, like, which is, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Like, what are your interests? Like all the surveys and the like and the, assessments and coaching, and certainly, still believe in all of those things. But I think something that that's on my mind more recently is to just start with something. And and I think more recently I've been trying to encourage people to stop overthinking it, and that learning something will help you learn everything.
Mm.
And so, when I've tried to just help people take the pressure off of themselves around finding the thing that's going to shape their career for, and their new trajectory forever. And maybe it's the stage of life I'm at, but like I saw this like 4 session, workshop for an intro to homegrown medicine. And um and it has nothing to do with HR, but it actually has everything to do with HR, in that it allowed my brain to just engage with new information, to just, put myself in that learning posture, and to just take the pressure off of always, reading the latest HR thing, or learning the latest, trend, or learning the latest, like. And um and 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 when we just let some of those neurons fire in some new ways that may on the surface seem like nothing to do with my day-to-day job or my career, it just allows our brain a little bit of freedom to roam. And I think we just need a little more of that. Like, and so again, it's the thing that's on my mind personally, so it's the thing that I think I've brought into my conversations more professionally.
Mm. I love this. There's one slide that I use in my change work. And it says, if we look at different things, we will end up looking at things differently.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. Wonderful. Kirditra, do you want to go next?
I'll go next. There are a couple things that came to mind for me. I often ask my son this: "What are you willing to do for free?" Right? Because that's kind of where that passion is, and invest in learning to whatever that is. So if it's how to grow a garden, if it's data analytics, whatever that thing is that you'd be willing to do for free, look at that more and look at that from a learning standpoint. Career wise, where do you want to be? Find someone that's there, find someone that's doing it right, and have conversations. Have conversations with those that you trust, that you can be vulnerable with, and find out where some of those shortcomings are, where some of those things that you can actually learn and grow. And again, going back to an earlier discussion, really the learning journey starts with you often. And go out there, do research, find different ways to learn, grow, and develop in the areas where that you do for free, as well as the areas of where you want to be long term.
Dr. Terry.
I love this question. Kind of a short story. During the pandemic, I wrote a book, Force Majeure, A Futurist Guide to Boldly Thriving in the Future of Work on Your Terms. And I laid out this framework around learning, and it's getting now, net new, and next skills. And so using that as a baseline. So what skill gaps do I have now? Okay, great. I've got to fill those. What skills are new on the horizon? Wow. Now I got to learn. Now I've got to learn some skill, get some skilling up and build muscle around generative AI. What skills are going to be next in the context, or what's next in the context of the role that I'm in? Okay, I'm taking a look at how this role of learning and development or talent acquisition or marketing research is evolving. Okay, I see where that's going. I see the trajectory over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. I'm going to get ahead of the future and garner those skills. And then the next is to take a look at the future of the industry, or to tie or to tie your interest. Now that you have these baseline skills that provide this pathway, right, moving forward into the future, what ideas or aspirations do you have that do not exist yet, that you can pull together and piece together based on these new opportunities that emerge by way of these skill combinations? And so it's very future focused. It is centered on continuous learning, but it's on your terms in a way that creates hope, possibilities, mitigates fear, and sets the stage for, this really dynamic energy around the amount of control that you have about your future.
Mary.
Oh, tough shoes to fill in to go last. But Candice, what you said really resonated with our audience. I see some comments in the chat, and I love it. I actually never heard anyone say that before, that learning something helps you learn everything. And it's so profound, and it's so simple and beautiful, and it's so true. So what I would say very simply is stop thinking about job titles. Just focus on what you want to do, what interests you, and then just be open to everything and anything. And who knows what that journey takes us. Candice, you said something at the start of our conversation that inspired me to think about hindsight. I have a controversial relationship with hindsight because, after it's all happened, we're all very smart about it, right? If only I had known at the beginning. But look, I just want to really echo what every one of you, my fellow panelists, have said today. Start somewhere, be bold, be brave, be kind to yourself. We've all made more than one mistake and bad decision in life, and that's not going to change no matter how educated we are. It's just life. I think it was Woody Allen who said, if you want to make God laugh, tell him about your plans, right? So I do want to make a little bit of a plug-in here for Manola, actually, because it's so relevant, and she's too humble to say it, but she recently published a book, which I happen to have here on my desk, Everyday Inspiration for Change. So I really encourage everyone to take a look at it. Sorry, the background is not working very well for me, but it's published last week, so it's hot off the press. And look for inspiration and learning in every day.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. And this was an amazing conversation. I echo everybody's joy and energy in the chats. I hope we will get to meet in this panel composition very soon. I do take with me a homework, and as soon as we will say goodbye, I will drop an email to Enrique saying, hey, let's build a summit or a series around generative. This is not my word for the day, AI. And what I will do, I just got an idea. I will actually ask ChatGPT what are the top 10 questions to use to facilitate conversations about ChatGPT. But before we close, I normally use this as an icebreaker, but I think it's an amazing question to ask to wrap this conversation up. If learning as a word didn't exist, what is one word that you would use to convey the same meaning? I will give you a few seconds to think about. We will do it clockwise, just as we started. And while you're thinking about it, I will just thank everybody for taking the time and the curiosity to be here today. Looking forward to welcoming as many of you as possible tomorrow for another conversation. And Dr. Terry, learning as a word doesn't exist. What is one alternative?
Momentum.
Wonderful. Mary.
Trying.
Candace.
Vulnerable.
Wow. And Kerditra.
Power.
Wonderful. I think this is my favorite round of punchlines and e-mic drops. Thank you so very much, Dr. Terry, Mary, Candace, and Kerditra. Such a joy and such a privilege to witness this conversation from a front row seat. So deeply, deeply grateful. Have
Thank
a
you,
wonderful
Manola. Thank you, everyone.
Yes,
Thank
Manola,
Bye.
thank you for
Bye-bye.
leading us through it. And thanks everyone for joining today.
Bye, everyone. Take care and keep on learning.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
See you soon.